Hello everyone and welcome to this presentation. I'm Richard Frankenberg and today we will talk about USD and how it can be used in an animation pipeline from an artist perspective point of view. We will create an animation project today from scratch, so we will start by modeling our asset and finishing by compositing our final shot. Before we start, I'd like to thank the team behind the FMX for organizing this conference this year and giving me the opportunity to speak here. Let me start by giving you a little bit background about myself and Prism. In the last years, I worked in different studios like Scanline VFX and Method Studios, and I worked there in the effects and character effects department. Mostly as a TD, but also as an artist. And seeing pipelines from these two very different perspectives was an extremely important experience to me. Different studios can have very different pipelines, but they overall have the same goal. They want to exchange data between different people and different software in an efficient way. For the same reason, I started to develop Prism a couple of years ago to manage my own projects. In 2018, I open sourced it and made it available for others to use. Nowadays, there are many small studios and individuals who are using Prism, and I'm extremely thankful for their feedback and support over the last years. So what does Prism actually do? Broken down to the core features, it manages the data in your project by handling the folder structure and naming convention. It manages how you save and version your scene files, playblasts, renderings, exports, and basically all the data you have to juggle around. Prism 2.0 is currently in development, and there will be many great free updates and also some commercial plugins for more advanced users. Today we will take a look at one especially interesting new update, which is the USD pipeline out of the box. So let's take a look at USD. USD stands for Universal Scene Description. And this already sounds very powerful. And yes, USD is an extremely complex topic. But luckily we don't have to understand exactly how USD works in the background and what every single feature of USD can do. The much more interesting question for us is, how can USD help me as an artist? And by the end of this presentation, we will hopefully have an answer to this question. Instead of talking about theoretical concepts now, let's have a look at some practical examples and let's start creating our animation project. We have a project here which was created by Magnus Moller and Mette Tange, and they allowed me to use it here for this presentation. So thanks a lot to the Tumblehead team. Before we jump into our 3D software, let's take a quick look at all the departments which we will go through. For our assets, we will start in modeling, where we will create our geometry. Then in surfacing, we will create materials for our assets. And for our characters, we also have rigging, but rigging is not implemented yet into the Prism USD workflow, so we will use Maya referencing for that. For our shot, we start in layout, where we will import our assets and place them in the scene and also create a camera. In animation, we will animate our characters, and in effects, we will add some simulation. In lighting, we add lights and render our shot. This department structure is also important when we want to understand how USD manages our data. Each department will export a file, and this file we will call department layer. These department layers get referenced by a file which we will call USD container. We have one USD container for each asset and also one USD container for each shot. So for our dinosaur asset, we will have one modeling department layer, which contains our geometry, and one surfacing department layer, which contains our materials. Both layers get referenced by the asset USD container. When we render our asset USD container, both layers get merged, and we will see our dinosaur with applied materials. And it works similar with the shot USD container. The shot USD container references in the department layers of layout, animation, effects, and lighting. And when we render our shot USD container, all these layers get merged and we will get our final image. Let's start creating our dinosaur model. For modeling, we will start in ZBrush. Prism 2.0 adds support for ZBrush, which means that you can save and version your ZBrush scenes using Prism. And you can also export and import geometry, which makes the data exchange between ZBrush and other software very easy. From the Z plugin menu, we can open the Prism menu, and here we have access to all the Prism tools for saving our scene and for exporting and importing geometry. We also can open a floating window here, which we can drag around to have access to our tools with one click. First, we want to open the project browser, and here we can create a new asset in the Scene Files tab. We call it Dino, and create a modeling department, and save a first version of our scene. Now we can start modeling in ZBrush, but I will skip that part and jump to a finished dinosaur model. At first I want to save my scene as a new version, and for that I can set a comment and also capture a preview image. In the project browser, we can see now our two versions. Our second version has now our finished dinosaur model, as we can see in the preview. Now we want to export our geometry. And here in the export window, first we can choose the file type. In this case, I want to choose Alembic, because we need it for surfacing, as we can see in a minute. Next, we can set if we want to add our model to the asset USD container, which we want to do in this case for the USD workflow. And we can see that our model will be added to the modeling department layer. The department layer is based on our current scene file. We can also set a sublayer. We don't need it in this case, but let's have a quick look at how sublayer work. As we said earlier, when modeling exports the geometry, the exported file will become the modeling department layer. But what if two artists are working in modeling on the same asset and both are exporting their geometry? They would overwrite each other's file, and to avoid that, they can use sublayers. One artist could write his geometry to the sublayer called character body, for example, and the other artist could write his geometry to a sublayer called character cloth. Then these both sublayers get referenced into a new USD file, which will become the modeling department layer. We are not using sublayers here for modeling, but we will use it later for lighting when we have sequence lighting and shot lighting in a different file, and both will get referenced in the lighting department layer. Back in ZBrush, we can set a comment and then hit export. Here in the Alembic options, we choose to export all our objects, and then Prism will export our objects to the correct file location, but we don't have to worry about the exact folder structure for that. Now modeling is done and we can jump to the next department. Now let's take a quick look at what happened in the background during the export. We exported our geometry in the Alembic format, and Prism then created the USD file, which becomes our asset USD container. The Alembic file is now our modeling department layer and is referenced into our asset USD container. Let's create some materials for our asset. We do this in two steps. In the first step, we will create textures in Substance Painter, and in the second step, we will create materials in Houdini and assign them to our asset. The Substance Painter integration of Prism is also new in version 2.0, so we will have similar tools here in Substance Painter for saving our scene and importing geometry, as we already saw in ZBrush. First, let's save our scene by going to the Prism menu and opening the project browser. Here we can see our scene files which we saved from ZBrush, and here on our asset we can create a new surfacing department. We don't create the default task, instead we create a new task and name it textures. Now we can save our scene. And when we save a new scene in Substance Painter, first we have to import geometry. Here you can see our asset USD container, which we exported from ZBrush, but as you can see there are two entries in this list. The one is the version 1, and the other one is the master version. And the master version is always a copy of the highest version, so if there will be a version 2 of the geometry in the future, the master version will be a copy of version 2. So if we import the master version now, we don't have to relink any file paths later on when the geometry gets updated. But as you can see, this asset USD container is in the USD file format, and in the current version of Substance Painter we cannot import any USD files. So what we can do is we can expand the asset USD container, and here we have our modeling layer. And if you remember, we exported our modeling layer in the Alembic format from ZBrush. So we can import this layer, and here we have our dinosaur. Now we can start creating textures for our asset, but I will jump to an already finished version. For the eyes we will apply a solid color later on, so now let's export our textures. Here from the Prism menu we can open the export dialog. We will not update any USD layers or assign any materials to our asset yet, we will just write textures to disk. We can choose from many of the different presets which are available here in Substance Painter, and if we want to, we can also create new presets. But in this case, I just want to export all the textures we have in our current scene. So we hit the export button, and all our textures get written to disk. Now let's start with the second part of our surfacing department, and for that we will create materials in Houdini. We will use the 3D light renderer for this project, so we will create materials specifically to this renderer. But if we would use another renderer like Karma or Redshift, which also supports USD, we would create different types of material, but the workflow would be the same. Let's start by saving our scene first, and for that we go to the project browser from the Prism menu. And here in the surfacing department we create a new task and name it materials. And here we can save a new version of our scene. Next we want to import our dinosaur model, and we can save some time by using a preset which Prism provides, which already sets up a lot of things we need. Here from the presets menu we can select surfacing, and we can see in the viewport our dinosaur model got imported. And if we look in the node graph, we can see at the top an area which imports our asset. In the middle we have an area where we can set up our materials. Then we have an area for testing our materials with some default lights. And at the bottom we have an area to export our materials. We can switch to the 3D light renderer and we can see our dinosaur is completely gray, so let's give it some color. Here in the material library node we want to create the materials, and at first we want to import our textures. Let's open the project browser again, and here in the textures tab we can see our materials which we created in Substance Painter. And in the dropdown we can see all the different map types. If we want to expand it, there's a checkbox here at the bottom, and then we have access to all the individual maps. But in this case I want to import the whole texture stack. So let's drag it into the Houdini node graph. And we have some options here what kind of nodes we want to create. Let's select the 3D light type. And as we can see, we have 4 texture nodes now from the 3D light renderer. But let's delete these nodes and instead let's look at the material menu. Here in the material menu, we can create a 3D light material which also imports all the textures and connects them to the correct slots on the 3D light material. If we take a look at the viewport now, we can see our material already got applied to our object. But if we go to the Houdini GL view, we see our dinosaur is gray in this preview. So what we can do about this, we can create 2 materials and assign both to the same asset. And based on the renderer, the correct material will be visible on the object. So let's go back to our texture library and drag in our textures again. But this time we create a USD preview surface material. And we can assign both of these materials to our asset by creating a collect node. And now we can see in the Houdini GL view, we have the colors. And also if we switch to the 3D light renderer, we also can see here, we have our 3D light materials. I created a few more materials for the eyes and for the tongue, but as you can see now the wrong material is applied to the whole object, so we have to fix the material assignments. We can do that here on the material library node, and at first we want to clear the existing assignment. And now we can create a new entry for all our materials and start assigning the correct materials to the correct parts of our asset. We can do that by selecting the different parts of our asset in the viewport, but we can also select them from a list. Our asset has now the preview materials applied in the Houdini GL viewport, and if we switch to 3D light, we can see our 3D light shaders. Now we want to export our materials, and for that we go to the bottom of our node graph, where we can see the export node. We just can press the Save to Disk button and we don't have to set up any of the output paths or naming conventions. Prism will handle all that for us. Now let's take a quick look again at our asset USD container. And as we can see, we exported our materials to a USD file, and this file became our surfacing department layer. It's referenced now into our asset USD container, and doing rendering it will be merged with a modeling department layer and will render our fully shaded dinosaur. The last department of our dinosaur asset is rigging. As mentioned earlier, rigging is not implemented yet into the Prism USD workflow, so we will create a normal Maya rig and use Maya referencing to bring it into our shots later. First, we want to save our scene. For that, we go into the Prism project browser and create a rigging department on our asset. Here we can save our scene as a new version, and now we want to import our dinosaur model. In the Projects tab, we can see our asset USD container, and if we right-click on it, we can import it. We have 2 options here. We can import it as USD objects, which is very efficient if we have heavy geometry, but we don't have access to the individual vertices in that case, and for rigging we need that. So we import it as normal Maya objects, which gives us a bit more flexibility. Here we have our dinosaur model now in Maya. We can also enable the materials and start rigging now. Our rig is finished now, and we want to publish it so we can use it in our shots. For that, we open the Prism State Manager, and here we can create different states in this list, and each of these states will perform a different action when executed. For example, we can create an export state, a playblast state, or a render state, and later we will execute multiple actions at once, but for now we just want to publish our rig. To do that, we create a new export state, and here we can select the object which we want to export, and we set the export format to a Maya scene file, and then we can export and publish our rig. Now we finished our asset, so let's take a quick look at what we created. Here in the standalone Prism project browser, we can go to the Products tab, and we can see we have the latest version of our asset USD container selected. And on the right side, we have a preview of our asset. It's not just a 2D preview, instead it's a fully 3D viewport, so we can rotate around our asset and see it from all the different angles. It also has the materials applied, and it looks a bit dark, So what we can do is we can apply a turntable preset, which will import some lights, a ground plane, and it will also rotate our asset. It also creates a camera, so we can see the turntable of our asset. We can also switch the renderer to 3D Light or any other renderer which we have set up, and then we get a higher quality version of our turntable. In this case, I just want to get a preview turntable, so I switch back. Now I want to save out a playblast of this turntable, and here in the playblast settings we have a few options. We can also open a preview to see if the resolution is looking good, and then we can save the playblast to disk. When the playblast is done, we can open it in our image sequence player and show it to our team. Before we start working on our shot, let's take a quick look at the assets we are going to use. First we have the dinosaur model, then we have the environment with some pebbles on the ground, and our human character. Now let's create the shots here in the Shots tab, and we can set a sequence name, a shot name, and set the frame range. We also create 2 more shots. For layout we will use Maya here, but we could also use Houdini or any other software which supports USD. First we want to save our scene, and for that we go to the Prism project browser, and here we can add a layout department to our shot. Then we save our scene file as a new version, and now we want to import our assets. First we import our human character as USD objects, which means that it keeps a reference to the USD asset, so when the asset updates in the future it will automatically update in our layout scene, and we don't have to manually update any assets. Here we have our human character, and now let's import the dinosaur, and finally the ground. Now we can select our objects in the Maya outliner and place them where we want them in the scene. I'm using version 0.9 of the Maya USD plugin, and unfortunately in this version we cannot animate our USD objects, but in future versions that will be possible. If we wanted to animate our characters, we could bring in our character rigs and animate them, but in this case it's not necessary. Next we can create a camera, which will be our shot camera, and frame our assets. Now we finish our work and we want to export our objects. For that we go in the Prism State Manager, and here we create a new USD export state. We set the frame range here, and then we add our camera as an object which we want to export. And we also make sure that we export our USD stage, which will export all our USD objects in the scene. Then we can press publish and we finished our layout. Let's take a quick look at what happened in the background when we exported our layout work. We created a new file, which becomes our layout department layer. This file contains our camera and references to our 2 characters and our environment asset. This layout department layer then got referenced into our shot USD container. Let's animate our characters. First we add an animation department to our shot, and then we can save our scene as a new version. Now we want to import our USD shot container, which contains the camera from layout and also the assets. To animate our characters, we also need to bring in our character rigs. First the human rig, and then the dinosaur rig. From the Maya outliner we can hide the layout characters because we don't need them for animation. Now we can start animating our character rigs. The animation is finished, and let's have a quick look. It's looking perfect, so we want to export our animated geometry. For that we open the State Manager, and here we create a USD export state. We set the frame range, and then we add the objects which we want to export. We don't want to export any USD objects from our scene, like the camera, the ground, or our layout characters, because we didn't modify them here in the scene. Of course we also want to create a playblast of our animation, and we could do a Maya playblast here. But in this case a better option is to export our objects first, and then create a USD standalone playblast of our USD shot container. By that we can make sure that our export worked correctly and no problems occurred. Also all our playblasts would have a unified look then, doesn't matter if we start them from Maya, Houdini or Prism standalone. Let's hit publish, and first our objects will be exported, and when that's done, a playblast of our USD shot container starts. Now we can open the playblast in our image sequence player and look at our animation. Let's take a look at our shot USD container. We saved our animation geometry in the USD file, and this file becomes now our animation department layer. This department layer gets referenced into our shot USD container. Our animation layer doesn't contain any information about the materials of our assets. The materials are stored in our layout department layer. When we render our shot USD container now, the animation layer and the layout layer will get merged, and we will get our animated characters with materials. Now let's create some effects. For our shot, I want to simulate the pebbles on the ground when the dinosaur steps by, and we can do this in Houdini. Many people think to use USD in Houdini they have to use Solaris, but this is not the case. For effects we will stay completely in SOPs, but we will still import USD objects and export an USD layer. First, we add an effects department to our shot and then save our scene. Next, we create a geometry node, and in SOPs we can load the effects Prism preset. This already sets up a couple of nodes for us. It imports our USD shot container, which contains our objects from layout and animation. It also creates an area where we can create our effects, and it creates some nodes to export our effects later. Here in the effects subnet, we can now start creating our simulation. I created a very simple pebble simulation, and let's have a quick look. Next, we want to export our pebble simulation, and for that we go here to the export node and press the Save to Disk button. We don't have to worry about the output path or any naming conventions. Prism will take care of that all. We saved out our pebbles now as a USD file, and this file becomes our effects department layer. This layer is now also referenced in our shot USD container. Next, we want to create a play blast of our shot USD container so we can see our simulated pebbles together with the animation. We could do this in Houdini, but we can also do it from Prism standalone. Here in our standalone project browser, we can select the latest version of our USD shot container, and here we can see our animation. We can also switch to our shot camera, and now we want to create the play blast. We can set a comment and also have another look at the preview, and then save it to disk. Now we could upload our play blast to Shotgun or Kitsu, or we can just open it in the image sequence player and show it to our team. The next department is lighting, and for lighting we will go into Solaris in Houdini. First, we create a new lighting department on our shot and then save our scene. Here in the stage context we can now create a lighting preset, and we have two different presets here. One for shot lighting and one for sequence lighting. Let's take a quick look at the shot lighting first. We can see our shot USD container got imported. We have an area where we can place our lights, and also some nodes to export our lights. We can see our animation playing here, but now let's delete all these nodes and instead create a sequence lighting preset. This creates a few more nodes which are structured in columns. On the left column we have our sequence lighting. The sequence lights will be applied to all our shots later. On the right side of that we have one column for each of our shots. Let's begin with the sequence lighting. At the top we can specify from which shot we want to use objects as a reference for our sequence lighting. We can switch the renderer to 3D light, and now we can start placing lights. We can use a cool feature from Houdini here, which are the insertion points. When we set the insertion point to sequence lighting and then place a light in the viewport, Houdini will place the light node in the correct location in our node graph. We are happy now with the sequence lighting and we want to export it. Here in the export node we can see we have sublayer enabled, which will create a sequence lighting sublayer, which will get referenced into our main lighting department layer. We will see how this works when we take another look at our graph from the USD shot container later. Now we can export our sequence lighting, and now I want to go to the shot lighting. As we can see, the sequence lighting already got applied to our shot, and now we can start creating lights specifically for this shot. I created a few lights for all of our shots, and next we want to export our lights. We could render our shot directly in Houdini now, but a better workflow is to export our lights and then render our USD shot container. This has the advantage that we are not depending on Houdini anymore for rendering. Instead we could also use other tools which can render USD files. By exporting our lights, we also make them available for other departments. So for example, when Effects creates a new version for the simulation, they can see how it looks with our lights. We have one export node for each of our shots, and here in the settings we can see sublayer is enabled as well. So we will write our lights into a sublayer named shot lighting, which will be part of our lighting department layer. We have 3 shots here, and we could easily press the export button and the render button on each node, but if we would have more shots it would be a lot of work. So luckily there's an option to automate that a bit. From the Prism menu we can open the state manager, which we were already using in Maya to export our objects. When we loaded the sequence lighting preset, it also created a few states here. And first we have the export states for our lights. We can disable the sequence lighting here, because we already exported that. Then we also have 3 states, one for each of our shots, to render our USD shot containers. On our render states we can enable the job submission, so we will submit them to deadline. When we execute all our states now, first we will export the lights of all of our shots in our sequence, and then submit a render job to our render farm for each of our shots. So we save a huge amount of time here. When everything is done, we can open Deadline and we can see our 3 jobs here, one for each of our shots, and they will start rendering now. Let's take a quick look at our USD shot container. We exported a sublayer named Sequence Lighting, and we also exported a sublayer named Shot Lighting, and in the background Prism created a new USD file and referenced in these both sublayers. The new USD file becomes now our lighting department layer and get referenced into our main USD shot container. Now that our USD shot container contains the department layers of all our departments, we send it to the render farm where it gets rendered to produce the final images. So far we went through all the departments after each other, but how does it actually look when we go back and update something? Here we have the animation of our dinosaur, and I also made a second version where I offsetted the animation a bit. We can see the difference when we select the different versions, but when we play back the animation, it becomes difficult to see the difference between the two animations. It would be nice to have both versions in the same scene, and we can actually do that by selecting both versions, and now here we have both our dinosaurs. We can play back our animation now, and we can see the exact difference between our animations. We only have one problem now: how do we know which version is the old one and which dinosaur is the new version? To see that better, we can right-click here in the view, and we can select the animation department of our old version. Now we can set a color, for example a dark red, and also adjust the alpha. Now we have a red ghost dinosaur for our old version, and the green dinosaur is our new animation. We can also see it from different angles to exactly compare our two versions. Now I want to create a play blast of that. And when it's done, we can show our team exactly how we changed the animation. We are happy with the animation now, but when we play it back, we can see that the nose of the dinosaur goes a bit out of the frame here. So we would like to update the camera. In many pipelines, updating a camera is a really painful process. First, layout has to create a new camera, then animation and effects have to import the new camera to see if it causes any problems, and then lighting has to start a new render. But let's see how much easier it gets when we are using a USD workflow. We did the layout for our shot in Maya, so we could go back now and edit our camera there. But we exported everything to a USD file, so why not switch to Houdini now and edit our camera here? First, we want to select the layout department on our shot, and here we can see the different versions of our Maya scene files, and we can save a new version from Houdini now. Here in the stage context, we can load a new generic preset, which already creates some nodes for importing and exporting. We don't see any objects here in the viewport, and this is because, by default, all the downstream departments and the current department gets muted in the import node. Normally when you're starting a new layout scene, you want to start from scratch, and you don't want to import any existing animation or effects work. In this case, however, we want to edit an existing object, so we can unmute all the other departments, and then we can see the objects here in the viewport. We can see the framing, which we want to fix, and we can do that by placing a new camera node here. We set the mode to edit, and then we select the shot camera. We can initialize the parameters now, and start transforming our camera. If we wanted to, we could also animate our camera here. We can also switch our renderer to 3D Light, so we can see exactly how our new camera position will look like in the final shot. It's really great for layout artists when they can see how their camera changes will affect the final image. Now the framing looks better, so we want to export our camera. But we don't want to replace the existing layout department layer completely, because the existing version also contains some references to our assets. Instead, we want to merge our new camera into the existing version. We can enable this option here on the export node, and then export our camera. Of course, we also need a new render for our shot now, and we can kick off a new render directly here from layout. Our shot USD container has all the different layers from the other departments, so we can just submit our USD container to the farm, and we get a new render of our shot. We submit the render to Deadline here, and we are done. We have our shot USD container selected here, and we can see the framing is much better now. But how do we actually know which version of the animation we are using and which departments are contributing to this shot? To get this information, we can open the Prism USD Layer Manager. Here we can see all the different department layers in our shot USD container and also the sublayers. First we have the lighting department layer, which has a shot lighting sublayer and also a sequence lighting sublayer. Then we have effects, animation and layout. To see how each of these department layers contribute to the shot, we can enable the preview here. We can see the animation playing, and now let's disable all the layers. Without any layers, we don't see anything. So let's enable the layout layer, and now we have the camera and the static assets. Next we enable the animation department layer, and here we get our animated characters. Next we enable the effects department layer, and now we have the simulated pebbles on the ground. Next is lighting, and for that we switch to the 3D light renderer. Without any lights, it's pretty dark, so let's enable the sequence lighting, and here we can see the effect of our dome light. Now let's enable the shot lighting, and we can see the final image. Let's go back to the GL view, and now we can also play around with the different versions of the individual layers. For example, let's go back to the previous camera. We can see the bed framing here, and now let's switch to the new camera. We can also change the version of our animation layer before we offsetted it. It's really great to play around with all these different layers and the different versions to really understand how the shot is built. To get even more information about our shot, we can open USD View, which is a tool included in USD. It shows us the hierarchy of our scene objects, and we can also see the different attributes on our objects like UVs and also material assignments. It's a bit more technical though, so we won't cover it in this video. We rendered out our final shot, and now we only want to do a little bit color correction in Nuke. Let's see if USD can help us with that. First, we create a compositing department on our shot, and then save our scene as a new version. Next, we can drag and drop our render into Nuke. Here we can see our animation playing, and now we want to do a little bit color correction on our dinosaur. For that we would need a mask, but unfortunately the USD 3D light renderer doesn't support Cryptomatte yet, so we have to create our own mask. For that we can import the USD shot container into Nuke, and this will create a few 3D nodes. On the Read Geometry node we can select which objects we want to import, in this case the dinosaur, the environment and the human. We also have a light and our shot camera, and now we want to create a mask. For that we create a material and assign it to the dinosaur. On the material we set the emission to 1 and all the other values to 0. We have a walking mask here, and now we can go back to the 2D view and shuffle the output to the alpha. This mask we can use now for the color correction, for example to change the saturation, or in this case to create a pink dinosaur. Now the only thing left to do is to create a Prism write node and save out our final comp to disk. Now that we finish our project, we can come back to the original question from the beginning, how USD can help me as an artist. As we saw, our assets and our data which we produced in the shots became more accessible to everyone in the team. We can easily see what other departments produced and compare different versions. Also, if you are in a review with the supervisor and something looks weird in the playblast, you can easily jump to the 3D viewport and have a look from another angle. USD is very efficient in loading very heavy data, so nothing is stopping you from doing a review in 3D. Since we store our data in a universal format, we are less dependent on an individual software. We can start our work in Maya and finish it in Houdini, or the other way around. When you update your work, you can see immediately how it will affect the final outcome of the shot. You don't have to ask other departments to update their versions or to start a new render, so we become less dependent on other departments and iterations will be much faster. And also it's fun to work with USD. It becomes a much more interactive process when we can see how our work contributes to the final shot. When we can start a turntable with just a few clicks, and we spend less time on updating versions or worrying about export settings, we become more efficient and we can focus more on the creative part of the job. So what are the next steps in the Prism USD implementation? The most important thing here is feedback, especially from artists. If artists don't understand the pipeline or don't like to use the pipeline, then it's not a good pipeline. Also, I'd like to support more USD features, for example variants. Then we can have different variations of our assets and our materials and switch them at any time in the process. More and more applications are supporting USD, and I'd also like to connect them to Prism. For example, Blender is adding support for USD, also Unreal Engine supports USD, and the NVIDIA Omniverse looks very promising. At some point in the future, all of this will be also usable in the cloud, so you can easily work with people all around the world. Now I'd like to thank everyone in the Prism community for their great support, and especially Manuel Köster for his great support and contributions since the first second of Prism. Also special thanks to Magnus Möller and the Tumblehead team, and Valentin Dornell and the Man Here Effects team for their great support over the last years. Now we are at the end of the presentation, and I know there's a lot more which we could talk about, but I hope you got a rough overview of how a USD pipeline can look like. Thank you very much.
I'm Manuel Köster. I've been a Prism user since day one. Literally, I've been here for the whole time. I'm a technical artist at Crytek. which is a game company in Frankfurt. And yeah, we have, I've also a lot of experience in VFX and film. And yeah, I'll hand off to Richie.
Yeah, I'm the main developer of Prism right now. I'm doing it full time. Before that, I worked in different studios, mostly in VFX, but also animation, and was also always a bit focused on pipelines. But I was also interested in how artists in different departments work, and yeah, I mostly have a Houdini background, just as you, Manu. But yeah, right now I'm mostly focused on developing Prism.
Sweet. So there's a lot of people already in the chat, so I'm gonna quickly say how we're gonna go about the Q&A. You can ask via two ways. You can ask your questions via two ways and engage with us. Either you ask in the Q&A section, you can give any comments in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Like I can see that there's one hand already, and if you raise your hand, we will ask you to join this meeting via voice and potentially video if you want. And then you can ask your question live and we will try to answer it there. Right, we don't have a question yet, but we do have a hand from Bo. I would like to invite you if you don't lower your hand. Let me quickly get that chat open again. Whoops, I just closed it down. Attendees. Ah, there we go. Okay, I'll invite you now to the panel. Cool. Bo, are you here?
Hello, you are muted.
Hello, hi.
Hi there.
Hey.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
How are
Nice
you?
to meet you too. My name is Bo. I'm a fourth year Pipeline TD student at the Netherlands Film Academy. Well, first off, I just wanted to say I am very impressed with Prism. It looked very good, very fast, and you have ZBrush support, which a lot of other stuff doesn't, just like Substance. But the main thing that bugged me or that I wanted to ask is how did you guys implement USD? And then I'm talking about the actual C++ binaries. Did you get a pre-built package and incorporate that inside Prism, or did you build it from scratch? Because it looked very implemented, and I was wondering that.
So Prism uses basically the USD binaries, which are coming with Houdini and Maya. And for the standalone version of Prism in the standalone project browser or in ZBrush, it uses pre-built libraries, which I built myself, which are included in Prism. So you can basically just install it and use it. You don't have to rebuild anything yourself. It's just using any available binaries when there are, and if they are non-provided in any DCC, it will use the Prism ones.
So you built for the standalone browser, you built the entire C++ project yourself. And do you also do that for Linux, Windows, and Mac? Or
I just built the official source code. I didn't modify the source code much. Right now, I'm just providing the Windows binaries. So right now, the focus is on Windows, not yet on Windows, not yet on Linux and Mac. So in the early phase, at least, it will focus on Windows.
This is mostly USD, by the way. Prism overall is available on Windows, Linux, and Mac.
Right. Good point.
Cool.
yeah, cool. Really impressive stuff. Nice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, I'll try to put you back into the attendees list. Thanks for the question, Bo. Yep, there you go. All right, we have one question from the chat. From which movie were the dinosaurs? Seems familiar to me.
Yeah, it was from a project from the Tumblehead studio. They released a short film called Multiverse, I think last year, or maybe it's already 2 years ago. You can find it on Vimeo. Maybe we can also post a link here in the chat.
Is Magnus in the chat, or actually? I can't see him right now, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a project which, they released officially, so it's free for everyone to watch. And yeah, definitely check it out. It's a really great short film.
Has it been created with Prism?
Yeah, it has been completely created with Prism from scratch.
Cool.
And yeah, through that, awesome. I also got a lot of feedback from the team, what kind of requirements they have. And cool. Yeah, it's always great to work with studios together to see what they need. And yeah, it makes the pipeline better. to have a good communication.
We have a couple of more questions. One from Nico. How did you come to make your tool open source?
It was basically, like I said in the presentation, I developed it as first for my own projects and to work with my own team on projects. So I didn't, really, my plan was not to create a product in the beginning. And after I finished some of my projects, I started to work in studios. So I didn't use my pipeline that much. And I wanted to see if other people can use it, if they benefit from it. And since it was still like an early development phase, I wouldn't charge money for it since it needed some more feedback and some more refinement to make it a professional solution for teams. And I think
let's go to the next question. We have a couple of more coming in, sorry.
Okay.
Can you retain, this is an interesting one. Can you retain material assignments in USD created in Maya? Also, how does USD store shading info? Meaning, if I work in Arnold, for example, do I need to export the shaders in their own files? Thank you. Prism looks amazing, by the way.
Thank
so
you.
Essentially, retaining material assignments and USD shading info.
Yes, USD can store material assignments and shading information. It depends on the renderer, if the renderer supports exporting of their materials. So basically, it depends a bit on the Maya USD plugin. I know for Maya, you can, for example, export Arnold materials, but maybe some of the other renderers doesn't support exporting materials from Maya. From Houdini, it also depends on the renderer. I think most renderers in Houdini probably support it to export the materials.
So it's renderer dependent, essentially.
What do you mean?
So it's all dependent on what kind of renderer you use.
Yes, right.
Perfect.
But USD itself has the option to store all the information like shaders, parameters in a USD file. So it's not a special material file, it's just a USD file which contains all the information.
Cool. Next one. Do you know about the Multiverse USD plugin for Maya? And if you do, what do you think about it?
Yes, I know about it. I tested it a little bit. It's really a great piece of software, and also like how fast they developed it and made it available for people to use it. Especially in the Maya versions before now the official USD plugin came out. Right now, I'm not using the Multiverse plugin. I'm using the official Maya USD plugin since I think it's a bit easier for artists if they can just use the existing USD features in Maya. But if there's a requirement for the Multiverse plugin, that of course could be also supported.
Cool. Awesome. That was it for the questions now. Please feel free to come join in. I will quickly post the contact details in the chat. So whenever you would like to contact us for anything, you can find it in the chat now. Yep. And we have another question here. Amazing presentation. Just a general question about Prism. Is it possible to use Prism in the cloud for collaboration?
Yes. Basically, when I worked with Manu together, like a few years already ago on some projects, we were using Dropbox to share the data. So we were creating a Dropbox, like a folder on disk, and we shared it on our Dropbox account. And then we could work remotely on different locations. And Dropbox was syncing all the files, and Prism could, we both could use Prism on our local computer. And that worked very good.
I would like to add that Prism also has a couple of additional features there, like that you only sync parts of your data. So whenever you make iterations on your FX caches, for example, that it doesn't instantly, whenever you create something, get cached to the cloud and sync to the cloud as well, because they sometimes are multiple gigabytes and that kind of stuff. So you can kind of control how you sync your data.
Yes, right. It's for exported caches, for renderings or playblasts. You can basically decide if you want to put it in the local folder or if you want to put it in the cloud folder, which you want to sync with your team.
Cool. I have a question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I think, yeah, it's the same question that is currently in the chat. When can we expect to have Prism 2.0 available? And will it stay open source?
Yes, so right now, as you saw in the presentation, it's the prototype of the USD pipeline is already ready. It's currently in the alpha phase, so it gets tested a little bit. And very soon we expect it to go in the beta phase to get some more feedback from people and what kind of requirements they have. Depending on that feedback, the release will be later this year. It will be probably in a few months, but we don't have a specific date yet. But you can keep up to date about any announcements on the website and in the contact information, which one is sent.
Then the second part of the question, will it stay open source?
Yes, so currently Prism is completely open source, and the core of Prism will always be open source. There will be no changes to that. There will be some plugins which are more targeted to more advanced users, to bigger teams who have some special requirements, which will which will be distributed as a commercial plugin. And this is also required to keep the support and development stable over a long time. Some resources are required for the development as well. And I think it will be available for a fair price. So, but as I said, the core will always be free and open source.
Sweet. Sounds pretty good. Well, let's see. I probably have one more question. Is Prism and this plugin suitable for larger facilities, like for larger studios? And what could be its pitfalls?
Yeah, right now Prism is mostly used by smaller teams and also individuals who want to manage their projects as simple as possible. It can also be used by bigger facilities. Right now, in the current version, which is 1.3, there are some features missing, which bigger studios might need. For example, user management and giving different people different permissions in the project. But this will also be addressed in Prism 2.0. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Happy to hear from bigger studios what kind of requirements they have. And usually bigger facilities also, they have already some kind of pipeline in place. It's always some kind of work to transition between different pipelines. But if there's a studio who sets up a new pipeline, then Prism would definitely be an option.
Cool, awesome. I think that might actually be it. No more open questions. We're running out of time anyway. I think that's a good end to wrap it all up. So thank you all. I will post the contact details once more, just so if you would like to get in touch.
I think there's one last question.
One last question. Oh yeah. Do you think there will be more dev with you in the future? So more development time, I guess? Or will there be more people developing pipeline? Prism Pipeline?
Yeah, I guess it's about the developers.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I definitely hope so. Currently, I'm looking into ways to expand the team. Of course, it also depends on the resources available. So currently looking into that, and hopefully there should be soon more developers on it, and which would definitely speed up the development and create many more amazing features in the future.
Until then, Prism is still open source. It's readily available on GitHub. So if you would like to contribute, as many other people have done in the past, please go do so on the GitHub. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, have a great rest of open. One more. Where would you be able to find out? Help develop. You can find more about Prism on GitHub and the website. If you go to the website, it's all going to be there. All right.
Maybe also check out the forum. Some people were developing some kind of third-party plugins, like for example a Kitsu integration, or like a while ago there was also a Trello integration. And just check in the forum. There's a lot of information available.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great FMX and see you around.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.